Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in firm opposition of Bill 4 because this legislation misunderstands what safety is, how safety is created, and who must be involved in shaping the systems that govern safety on treaty lands. This government has said Bill 4 is about protecting communities. But, Mr. Speaker, you cannot protect communities if you do not empower them. And you cannot strengthen safety by weakening partnerships, weakening accountability, and slashing prevention programs. Mr. Speaker, I also speak today with over 3 years of experience of sitting on the Edmonton Police Commission, a civilian body legally responsible for governance, oversight, and holding the Chief of Police and the service to account. And my dear late Musham Cecil, he served over 25 years as a member of the RCMP. And between us, nearly 3 decades of practice, oversight, and experience. I know what policing looks like when it works, and I also know what it looks like when it does not. And this bill is taking us in the wrong direction. In fact, it's taking Alberta backwards. I want to begin with our treaty relationship. Treaty is shared governance, shared responsibility, and shared decision-making between the Crown and First Nations, a constitutional relationship affirmed by Section 35 and repeatedly upheld by the Supreme Court of Canada, the Haida case, the Mikisew case, the Chilcotin case, and many others. Mr. Speaker, I know that this government has met with chiefs. Meeting the chiefs is not the issue. The issue is the chiefs have told me that this government heard them but did not respond to what they heard, and definitely did not empower the chiefs. They were promised action, but nothing in writing. They were invited to meetings, but not invited to co-develop the bill. They were given nods, but absolutely no authority, no investment, no shared decision-making, not a single clause that reflects their leadership. Consultation without authority is not treaty implementation. It is colonialism with better catering. When legislation reshapes policing, emergency services, and public safety, powers all systems that they disproportionately impact Indigenous peoples. First Nations cannot simply be participants. We must be partners. Bill 4 ignores that fundamental truth. Mr. Speaker, Bill 4 expands policing and emergency service powers, but it does not expand Indigenous civilian oversight, community governance over safety, public accountability measures, or transparent reporting requirements. Dr. Michelle Lawrence calls this, quote, authority creep, end quote, the steady expansion of state power while the checks on power remain completely frozen. And we know where that leads, Mr. Speaker. Racialized enforcement, over-policing of Indigenous peoples, and declining of Albertans' trust. First Nations and Métis people are a very small percentage of Alberta's population, but we fill the jails. We are the unhoused, and we are the ones in a mental health crisis. And when you expand enforcement in a society marked with inequity rooted in colonialism, all this government is doing with this bill is expanding inequality. Bill 4 fails to acknowledge this reality, Mr. Speaker. It contradicts the spirit and the intention and the requirements of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. You see, this declaration requires free, prior, and informed consent on laws affecting Indigenous peoples. In fact, this government can read it themselves, Article 19. The protection of Indigenous women with disabilities and persons with disabilities, Article 22. And Indigenous participation in administering programs related to justice and safety, Article 23. Let me remind this UCP government that a conversation is not consent. And to be crystal clear, a briefing is not a partnership, and a promise without paper is not implementation. The United Nations Declaration for the Rights of Indigenous Peoples calls for co-development, not after-the-fact notification. Bill 4 falls dramatically short, embarrassing so. And furthermore, Mr. Speaker, the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls told us very plainly, public safety systems in Canada continue to fail Indigenous women. Yet this bill expands power without addressing the systemic failures we already know too well as Indigenous women. And Mr. Speaker, this UCP government cannot stand in this House and declare at the top of their lungs, I might add, that just because they say it loud, it doesn't make it so, repeatedly asserting to protect vulnerable people while ignoring the systems that place them in the risk in the first place. Elders, chiefs, and scholars warned us decades ago in the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples in the 1980s, when the mechanisms of colonialism are left without oversight or partnership, they do exactly what they're designed to do, and that is perpetuate genocide. Mr. Speaker, sadly, this bill strengthens the wrong tools. The most essential piece of public safety, the one missing entirely in this bill, is prevention. Alberta does not have a policing crisis. Alberta has a prevention negligence, completely created by this UCP government's decisions. The evidence is overwhelming in the research. Housing reduced police contacts by over 70%. Supportive housing reduces emergency use like EMS and paramedics and firefighters by over 70%. Housing First reduces justice involvement by up to 50%. Calgary Homeless Foundation shows that housing saves $34,000 per person per year in justice and in health costs. Mr. Speaker, you cannot argue with the basic simple math. When government cuts prevention, like this UCP government does, the police get the call. No youth supports, the police get the call. No detox beds, the police get the call. No mental health care, the police get the call. No housing, the police get the call. No place to defecate, the police get the call. No place to urinate, the police get the call. Police are responding to failures created by decisions made by this UCP government. And instead of fixing the root causes, Bill 4 adds more power where the problem cannot be solved, just simply perpetuated. Mr. Speaker, international jurisdictions have reduced crime, and they did it with one simple common sense thing. They all invested in prevention, not enforcement. Portugal, research it. Finland, look at it. Scotland, read about it. Housing cities focused across the United States of America and Indigenous nations across Turtle Island using restorative justice and land-based healing. The pattern is crystal clear, Mr. Speaker. When people have supports, when people have culture, when they have stability and treatment, and they stop interacting with police on those issues, you create safety. If this government had invested in supportive housing, mental health care, youth services, treatment, there would be no need for Bill 4 and no talk of these modern jails framed as compassionate care. You know, Mr. Speaker, safety is created by stability, not by force. This bill consolidates provincial authority instead of empowering. Instead of empowering the municipalities, like you heard from my friend, instead of empowering treaty nations, instead of empowering Indigenous-led safety models or community organizations, we could have had a bill that was co-developed with municipalities, with First Nations, with women who experience domestic violence. But rather, we just have a bill coming from an authoritarian that is going to do absolutely no good to First Nations and Métis individuals. Hi, Nanaskaman, Mr. Speaker.